All right, today we're going to look at, so this is 3A number 2 notes. And it's all about simplifying powers of I, so I to any power. I'm just simplifying this down. Your answers are either going to be I, negative I, 1, or negative 1. Those are pretty much all of your answers if it's I to a power and that's it. So we're going to look and dive into these examples. So things to keep in mind. We have square root of negative 1. That's just I. That's a given. Square root of negative 1. Anytime you see a square root of negative 1, it's just going to be I. So anytime for this, it's very important to understand that if you square the square root of negative 1, and since it's equal, we have to do what we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other to keep it equal. So square and square root, those are opposite operations. So those will simplify each other out, giving you negative 1. And on the right side, you have I squared. So this is very important. Anytime you have an I squared, we can replace it with negative 1. The negative 1 is a real number, not an imaginary number. So it's much easier to work with. So that's what we're going to actually do today, is everything's going to be based off of I squared. So let's dive into example 1. I to the third power. I just automatically write I squared, and I put it in parentheses. And I think, how many I squareds could I divide out of I to the third? So how many squareds can you divide out of 3? And it's got to be even, no decimals. Well, you can only divide 1 out. But 2 times 1 is only 2, and we need 3. So what you need to do is you need to multiply by 1 more I, because that'll be 2 times 1 is 2 from here. That's 2 i's, I squared, and then there's 1 more with multiplication. You add the exponent, so power to power, so 2 times 1, so power to power here. You multiply, and then when it's not power to power, it's like bases with multiplication, you add exponents. So this is equivalent to I to the third. Let's see if I can get rid of all that. All right, and then next, the next step I do, the only thing I do, in parentheses, the I squared. So what's in I squared there? That's going to be negative 1. And then negative 1 to the first power times I. So only thing I did was I just replaced the I squared with negative 1. And now we can simplify, we can look at simplifying. Now the next thing is negative 1 to whatever power it is. So negative 1 to the first power is just negative 1. So now I'm going to take parentheses away because we worked with the exponent. And negative 1 times I is the last thing we do, which is just negative I. So that's our final answer. So I to the third is simplified down to negative I. All right, let's dive into I to the 16th. So the very first step is I write down an I squared, put it in parentheses, and how many squares, I don't know why the little dot's there. How many I to the 16ths can you divide, how many I squareds can you divide out of 16? So 16 divided by 2. Well, that's an even number, that's 8. And with these power rules, 2 times 8 is 16. So that's good, we have 16, that we don't need to incorporate any more i's. The next step is to replace the I squared with negative 1. And then negative 1 to the power, negative 1 to the 8th power. So you can kind of think, I'm going to go off to the side up top. Negative 1 times negative 1, so that would be positive 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. Oh yeah, and this is negative 1 to the squared. This is negative 1 to the third. So negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. And then if you do negative 1 to the fourth, so just something to keep in mind. So 4 of them, when you multiply them together, you get positive 1, another positive 1, and 1 times 1 is 1. So you got positive 1, negative 1 with a negative or odd exponent, even exponent, you get positive, even exponent, you get positive. So odd exponent, you're going to end up with a negative. So we have even, so I'm going to go back down to our problem here. It's an even exponent, so negative 1 to the 8th. You can also use a calculator, but negative 1 to the 8th, that's an even exponent. So That is going to be a positive 1, Mr. Johnson. Positive 1. All right, I to the 17th. So we think about how many I squareds can you divide out of 17? Well, we can't divide it evenly. But what we can do is we can do times 8. 2 times 8 is 16. But we need 17, so we multiply by 1 more I to get, think about your power rules. You have 2 times 8, power to power. 2 and 8 are both powers, exponents. That's 16. And then it's multiplication, so we add exponents of like bases, so that's 17. Next thing is I just replaced the 1 squared, or I squared with negative 1. And then I look at negative 1 to the 8th power. Well, we just did that up top. Negative 1 to the 8th is positive 1. And positive 1 times the last thing, I, is I. So that I to the 17th is I. All right, last problem. I to the 82nd. How many I squareds can you divide out of 82? I guess that's 41. I might actually do another problem. And I squared is negative 1. Negative 1 to the 41st. That's an odd exponent. So that would become negative 1. So there are your, so that's how you do each problem. Those 4 are exactly how you would do any problem that's up even or a positive power. I'm going to do a quick example. No, another one, simplify. I'm going to do I to the negative 24. Dealing with negative exponents. So you take the base of the exponent. Actually, I'm going to put another number in there. I'm going to put 5 on the outside. 5i, so that's 5 times I to the negative 24th. The negative exponent and its base, so the 5 is not part of the base. If it was, there'd be in parentheses around the 5 and I. It's not. We do, and then that, the base and the exponent need, right now it's in the numerator, it needs to go to the denominator. And that makes it a positive exponent. And we'll talk a little more in class about that. And then you start just looking in the denominator, how many I squareds can you divide out of 24? That's just 12. And then I squared is negative 1 to the 12th. Negative 1 to the 12th, that's an even exponent, so that's going to be a positive 1. And 5 divided by 1 is 5. So there's your final answer. All right, come to class with any questions you have. Thanks.